Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Gio and Joey Show. We have I don't want to say old friend, but we have a frequent friend of the show, Dr. Jennifer. How you doing today, and Joey?
Good.
Good, good, good. Joey, set it up. Let the folk know what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah. Well, I think this is kind of a long overdue. I know we've talked about Charlie Kirk before, but we haven't done like a full, like in depth of like his arguments and stuff on the Sabbath and his book. And Dr. Schwirzer, I saw that she posted one, and I thought it was at least from an Adventist perspective, it was the best one that I had read yet. And so I was like,
Hmm.
well, we ought to have her on and talk about it. But yeah, so we're going to be talking this book. We're going to be about Charlie Kirk, the Sabbath, and we'll just see where the conversation goes. But
Yeah, and it's awesome because I know, not all the time when we do an interview, everybody has read the material, but in this case, we all have read the book. And so this is good. And I did enjoy your article. I read it today. So, what inspired you writing the article?
Reading the book, you know, I mean, here's the thing. I know there's a lot of conflict over Charlie Kirk, and I said right at the top of the article, this is not about the conduct of the
Mhm.
writer, but the content of the book. And so I had already written an article about Charlie Kirk and whether or not he was a racist and really
Oh,
went kind
yeah.
of granular to try to figure all that out the best I could. Of course, who can figure anyone out? But
Yeah.
I did the best I could. And in that article, just to preface, I admitted that he said some things that were just unnecessarily harsh and fell hard on people's hearts. And the guy talked all day long, every day. People are going to say bad things sooner or later because we're sinful. And he's also part of a kind of a political movement that can be insensitive sometimes to the issues on the other side of the aisle. So I don't claim he was righteous in everything he said. However, I didn't think that it was fair to claim he was a racist, given that he tried so hard to platform so many black people.
Hmm.
And I also, as I watched the videos, see, I didn't really know who he was before he was shot. I mean, I knew who he was, but I hadn't really followed him or anything. But as I started watching those videos, I really,
No,
I really
sorry. Go
came
ahead.
to, yeah, that's right. I came to appreciate how he engaged with people. I thought he was, for the most part, very compassionate
Mhm.
to people that had strong ideological differences and really just, I didn't think what he was doing was mostly debate. I thought most of it was dialogue.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
I admire
I agree
more
with
of
you
us.
there. I didn't know much about him. I didn't know much about his long form content. All I saw, what I knew about him was his shorts, right? And they come in and most of it I agreed with. Some things I had to then go look at the long form to make sure he wasn't taken out of context or it was cut up in a way to make him look bad. But you know, going back to the book, um, I like the fact that he was as prominent as he was exploring the subject.
Exactly. And how, as a Seventh-day Adventist who has kept the Sabbath pretty much my entire adult life, can I just ignore that? A
Hmm.
prominent public figure wrestles not just with a Sabbath, but with the Sabbath, and
Hmm.
has something to say about it, and I'm going to ignore it. I couldn't do that. So I read the book, and once I read the book, I felt like I needed to say something. I
Hmm.
have my approach to writing and communicating publicly is to address issues that people are actually thinking about, because most people
Hmm.
aren't thinking about, Hebrews chapter 6. They're
Yeah.
thinking about what's happening in the world. And so I address those things, and then I try to draw people into biblical content. But also, I also try to speak sanity, because so many people are so polarized and so extreme in their view of things and so influenced by the media that I try to just have this measured, sane approach. And a lot of people really appreciate it.
Hmm.
And so I do address current issues, but I try to address them in a way that doesn't exacerbate the polarization and the emotionality, but rather helps settle some of it.
Yeah, and that's
I
I look, I that's why I enjoyed the article, because you weren't
yeah.
trying to paint him as this champion of the Sabbath, nor were you, saying that he was denouncing the Sabbath. You could see that he was actually wrestling with it, and I agree with something, with the premise of your article, where when he wrote about the Sabbath and then defended it from Scripture, you could see that it was easy for him to write about it because it's biblical and it's easily defensible. But when he had to then give the other side, it was like, I like how you pointed out in the article, it's like a 4-year-old could make that argument.
It was like he went back to kindergarten. Like the
Yeah.
guy has such an incredible, he had such incredible, he was an intellectual giant, and
Mhm.
his command of reason was incredible. And so, yes, once it was a viable idea, he could reason through it, just say it like nobody else could. And then he gets into the bad ideas, and it
Mhm.
sounds like he's going, blah, 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 you know,
Yeah.
it's like he
Joey, jump in
regressed.
here.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is too, and was it last week that you mentioned something about you thought, Gio, that you thought that maybe not as far as Tyler Robinson's motives,
Yeah.
but as far as like from the context of the great controversy and the devil, like this was very possibly the reason why he was taken out, right? Not again,
Mhm.
that's not that it's Robinson's motive, right?
Yeah.
Which seemed pretty clear to me. Obviously, we'll let the trial play out. But as far as like from the war behind the scenes,
Mhm.
like the devil doesn't want this guy to go all the way the direction he was going. Now, obviously, we don't know, where anybody would land up. But when you read, and the thing that I took most away from the book is that the actual defense of the Sabbath was not actually like, eh, it was not actually like Doug Batchelor or our evangelistic material, which is always just focused on proof texting the day,
Mhm.
for the most part. But it was actually rooted in, because he didn't come to it by proof texting.
Mhm.
Charlie came to it because of his friendship with Dennis Prager, who was an Orthodox Jew, but he really came to it because it saved his life, right? And that's
Mhm.
like, especially in the videos and stuff, that was the stuff that was the most moving. He said, no, 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 keeping the Sabbath saved my life, it saved my marriage, it saved my career, right? Right, putting aside the electronics, right? Like, it was rooted in experience of actually experiencing God on that day. And I feel like as Adventists, right, because we're always ready, like we're ready, like, we're loaded for bear, we're gonna fight you, right? We can prove you that Sunday is not the Sabbath. But it's like at the end of the day, I actually think what Charlie was doing, and especially right if he would have continued, and rest in peace. But I actually think the arguments that he's making, right, and the experience, that would actually win more people to the Sabbath than like a proof text over what day.
Love that.
Mhm.
So I had two sections in my blog that I wrote:
Mhm.
honor roll and eye roll. So the
Yes.
honor roll
I
things
thought
about
that
the
was
great,
clever, by the way.
so that was the great stuff about the book, and the eye roll was the,
Mhm.
going back to kindergarten. So in the honor roll section, I couldn't do a comprehensive review because other
Mhm.
people have done it, and I didn't have time.
Yeah.
But there was one chapter, and it was called Melicha, Evid, and Your Dog. And I still don't really know
Mhm.
why he named it that, which
Yeah.
was so obscure. But I said in my blog, he might have called it the best explanation of biblical justice ever.
Mhm.
And it
Mhm.
would have been
Mhm.
an aptly named chapter, because he goes into how the Sabbath was the great equalizer of humanity,
Mhm.
that servants and their masters, so all both observe the Sabbath, and he even goes into animal justice, you
Mhm.
know, and goes. He says some beautiful things about how the Sabbath was really God's way of saying, "Hey, look, you're all equal
Mhm.
before me." Don't and it happened every week. Humanity was effectively humbled and de-stratified with the animal creation,
Mhm.
and people were brought back, that kind of a divine reset to a place of treating one another with compassion and justice. And I just I was blown away. I said to myself, if I had read one Adventist book that approached the Sabbath like this, I would have done backflips.
Yeah, and it's going back to what Joey was saying and what you're alluding to. We've kind of been so busy in the apologetic world of defending it,
Mhm.
in contrast to Sunday, that we have lost the ability to admire the beauty of it and the awe of the Sabbath from just a standpoint without having to defend it. And as Joey was alluding to, if we would sell the beauty of it, it might win more people to Christ than simply text. And before we dive deeper into that point you were making, though, did you have any expectations before you read the book of how it was going to go? Like, what was
I
your
knew
mindset going into it?
I knew he was a great thinker and writer, and I mean, I didn't know he was writing because I'd never read anything, but he was just very articulate, and so I knew it would be a good read, and I knew he would make points effectively. I didn't know that he would be as astute historically,
Mm-hmm.
uh, astute on human nature, astute on law and government as he was,
Mm-hmm.
especially like when he rolled back a lot of history in the beginning of the book. I don't remember the specific points of it, but
Mm-hmm.
he's a scholar. You know, he's
Mm-hmm.
not he's not just goofing around. He was a serious intellectual, and so I was a little, the space he occupied was he was kind of a Rush Limbaugh almost. Like
Mm-hmm.
his long form stuff would be him ranting on conservative politics, and then the short form stuff was usually clips of his dialogues with these kids on college campuses, and it was typical kind of right wing shock jock stuff,
Mm-hmm.
Um, but he's really a serious intellectual, and that's what came jumped out at me in the book.
Okay. If you,
Yeah,
if
it wasn't just one sentence after another, like 4 word sentences with
yeah,
exclamation points, like an evangelist would write.
yeah, he it was well thought out. What do you
Yeah.
think? What do you think his typical crowd, right? Evangelical Christians who worship on Sunday because of the resurrection. What do you think they think of the book? And have you read any reviews from a Sunday keeper about the book?
Joey, do you have anything for that?
Yeah. Have any of you read it?
Well, I don't know that I've read any reviews. I've listened to some people. Well, so most people who are fans of Charlie, um, well, and I think this kind of goes into the civil war that's taken over TPUSA since his death, right, and the
Mm.
conservative movement more broadly, right. So I think the people that I would say the people that I like, obviously, I had some disagreements with Charlie, mainly because I don't like Trump. One philosophy where maybe I agree with him more, but I would say like the side of TPUSA and Charlie's legacy that I more agree with, like those evangelicals and stuff. I think they appreciated the book. Now I have noticed, right, the Nick Fuentes types, right,
Can
the
you
angle they're going is right. This book that he published. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
can you give me a summary of the Civil War in Turning Point?
Oh yeah,
Oh
it's
yeah.
it's there, yeah.
Ever since Charlie died, particularly so in that first turning point, like the Amerifest that they had the December after, so just last December, right? So this is the first big thing since he died. Um, well, basically, so I guess I would say my side was really represented by Ben Shapiro, right? He went there, he gave a speech, right, calling on the conservative movement to moral accountability, right? Calling out things like Candace's, the lies about Erica Kirk, right? The conspiracism, whatever that word is, right? Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, these stuff. He really called that out, and like that's kind of been one side. I would say like the Babylon B guys, Seth. Oh, I can't think of his last name, but Seth from the
Dylan?
Babylon B. Yeah,
Dylan?
Seth Dillon, Joel Berry, right? They've kind of really been standing strong, I would say. And then like the other side, which basically they want to use in the aftermath of that death, they've kind of been going, the anti-Semitism, all that stuff. And so I would say that side, and maybe even kind of rehabilitating like Nick Fuentes, right? That's kind of that side. And since his death, that it's kind of been that war. And like the big thing has been, Candace has been saying that the Turning Point USA staff, up to and including potentially Erica Kirk, right, were somehow involved with Charlie's assassination, covering it up like because of Israel or some nonsense. So that's kind of the civil war that I'm referring to. And so I would say the side that I would consider them the pretend friends of Charlie, they've been saying stuff like, right, this was kind of like a weird Zionist, infiltration, right? Or, the book was actually edited or something like that. And I think that's been one. And I think as Adventists, like, why we should be paying attention to that is as Charlie Kirk was talking about the Sabbath, and as any Christians start talking about the Sabbath, the first thing they get accused of now is, oh, well, you're Jewish light, or you're a Zionist, or you're that. And so that's the argument that's going to be used against us, I really think, which actually makes it more disturbing, given that probably when I was at Andrews, probably a third, if not more, of the student body was some level of anti-Semitic. So that was a little disturbing. But yeah, so I would say that's one reaction. But I would say the other reaction has been, oh, this is a positive book. I'm glad Charlie got blessing on that, and we should probably honor Sunday better.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it's basically the Jewish Zionist debate that's splitting the USA. Because I'm aware of that sort of writ large, but I wasn't aware of it within the Turning Point, except that, Candace used to be involved. Yeah. Could we talk about this, that there's two theories about the book? One is that Adventists embrace. One is that he was struggling with the issue of the Sabbath and kind of going back and forth. And the other is that the book was changed. And that he was right on the cusp of fully embracing and going public with not just a Sabbath, but with the Sabbath as a requirement by God through the Ten Commandments. That he was about to come out with that, and that it was all there in the book, and then he was killed and they changed the book, and it was all a plot, many people believe. Of course, there's no way to prove all of that.
Yeah.
I can see where it would be an attractive theory if you really loved him and thought highly of him. However, and I'll say this because I don't know, maybe they did change it. I can't prove or disprove it. But I will say this, that what I know of human psychology and what the feel I got from the book about him as a person, it's entirely plausible that the book wasn't changed. And that he was wrestling. And I think the fact that at the end of the book, he does this 10 reasons to keep the Sabbath and 10 reasons you don't have to keep the Sabbath.
Yeah.
And that's when eye rolls came in as the second half of that. But I could totally see how a human being whose whole platform and even social network is flush with these Sunday enthusiast evangelicals that are also lovely people who have loved him well and who have mentored him and have supported him, how hard it would be to break away from that if you knew what you taught would offend. And so to me, it's entirely plausible that he was just a wrestling man, and everything in that book he wrote and he was struggling back and forth to a point of eye roll for us. But if we put ourselves in this position, I think we could see how that could happen.
I look at it as he was Nicodemus in chapter 3. Nicodemus believed Jesus was who he was. He believed what Jesus was saying. He fell in love with Jesus at that point, but he wasn't ready to go all the way, to commit. And unfortunately, for Nicodemus, it took 3.5 years and the death of Jesus Christ for him to finally come out publicly. And I think with Charlie, as you point out, you see the wrestling in the book. And I think he was firmly committed to the Seventh-day Sabbath. But then because of perhaps, I don't want to say direct influence, but because the world around him does something different, he would have his moments of doubt. And this is why I talking to Joey, I think it was last week, that I think not Tyler Robinson, but in the great controversy, he was snuffed out before he became a true champion for the Sabbath. That's my theory. Can't prove it. We'll find out in heaven one day. But that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
One thing
Yeah,
I
I
would
think
add.
sometimes we underestimate the power of emotional bonds with people, and we
Mm-hmm.
really have to wrestle with that when it comes to Sabbath. Like I'm a mental health provider, and I often tell people you need a church home. But if they're already part of a Methodist church and they have a relatively healthy church that they're going to, it's really hard for me to say become a Seventh-day Adventist, because they
Yeah.
may end up in the toxic Adventist churches. And
Mercy.
then what have you done to their mental health?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Joey.
No, you're all good. That's a great point. And I would just add one thing about the connection piece in Charlie Kirk, right? So I know he had Adventists in his life, right? I know Ben
Mm-hmm.
Carson, right? And I know the Wisdom Pearl people,
Yeah.
Ivan Raj and stuff had associated with him. But here's one thing that I think Adventists really need to consider is, are we putting blocks in front of people's, like, being able to join us, or like wanting to join us in this sense, right? Are we putting blocks away from the truth? Because when Wisdom Pearl wanted to host this event, now it was an event that they were going to host, they were hosting it, it was supposed to be about the Sabbath, all these things, right? The backlash that they got from other Adventists for hosting this event, right? For just, it was supposed to be a dialogue with a public figure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Was like immense, right? And all these names. And, like, it's one of those things that I worry about. Is like, sometimes when I see, the Adventist conspiracy theories about Charlie and about all these things, well, it's very possible in the lead up to this event, Charlie Kirk read some of these things. Now, I do think, and I know Ivan Raj, right? And so I know that his interactions with him were positive, right? So I know Charlie had positive feelings to the Adventists that engaged with him, right? And that actually came out, right? There's some clips and stuff at other speeches that he gave where Charlie was speaking positive, and obviously he mentions us in the book too, but even in public places he would mention us, right? And I was thinking about this in the context too. Obviously people can have whatever opinions they want about his theories, but when the village church had Peter McCullough and they established that relationship, they still have that relationship. Well, as far as I know, he's still not an Adventist. But now I've seen at least 3 speeches that Dr. McCullough gave where he wasn't with Adventists. There were no other Adventists around. He was out in the public doing some event, and he mentions this book, The Great Controversy by Ellen White, and
Mm-hmm.
how he thinks that the narrative that it puts out, like, explains our time. And so when I look at this, I see what Village was trying to do. They were trying to establish a relationship with someone in the world who, whether some other Adventists agree with them or not, they had some agreement with, or they wanted his perspective. And so they had him on, they established a relationship, and the message went forth into other places. And I feel like if we engaged with people, right, and we gave our people who were engaging with people room to do that without, like, roasting them as roasting an organization with an Indian Adventist founder as white supremacist, I think is kind of dumb anyway, right? And obviously Charlie was not white supremacist either.
Mm-hmm.
And I know this will make some Adventists unhappy with me, but, like, that is a hill that I'll die on. He absolutely, I can speak confidently. I know for a fact Charlie Kirk was not a racist. He was not a white supremacist. And when I see a conference president saying that, it does actually kind of get under my skin a little. But it's just
Well,
like,
he
so I
actually
guess
says part of the
I was
chapter that
just
I
gonna.
was quoting.
Sorry.
That's all right.
No, you
He
go.
says that it was the Bible, and I think it had something to do with the Sabbath, that inspired William Wilberforce
Mm-hmm.
in leading out the charge against slavery in the UK. And he,
Mm-hmm.
he traces all that stuff and shows up in the most clear, unmistakable way as non-racist, anti-racist in all the ways that really count.
Yeah, for me personally, for me, Charlie Kirk's biggest legacy that he left behind for me is the attitude of, look, I can sit down with anybody and have a conversation. You know, just because you believe differently than me, I can have a cordial conversation with anyone. Unfortunately, as we saw in the life of Charlie Kirk, um, not everybody feels that way, and some people are led to violence, and that is the sad part of, as we know, the human nature. And it's even in religious people. You know, the Bible verse that says there will come a time where they kill you thinking they're doing service to God. And so I think if everybody would just have that attitude of talking to each other to try to understand each other. Look, I can one of the things I like to do is understand other people's argument. And lately, like, and I don't mean lately like yesterday, but in this past year, I've been studying Calvinism deeply just to see where they get it from. And I don't, you know, you can understand something deeply without having to agree with it, but at least you don't then caricature someone's belief, and you can disagree it. And I think Charlie's legacy was that. Let's just have a dialogue. Let's talk, and let the the power of ideas and truth float to the top. Your thoughts on that?
I heard two objections to his main ministry, as far as I'm concerned, was his dialoguing with those college students.
Yeah.
Nobody has as successfully entered this academic sphere, the completely insanely woke academic sphere, and challenged their ideas with as much grace, humility, I would argue,
Mhm.
and talent. Nobody has done that. And so part of me just wants to say, take a seat until you do it. And then you can complain about the way he did it. But the two criticisms I heard, one was from a conservative Adventist, and the person made a great case for the things that were right about Kirk and Turning Point, but then said, but he was a debater, and debate, we're told not to debate. And I just thought about that, and I thought, he wasn't really debating, he was dialoguing.
Mhm.
He did do some debating in those circle things that they do,
Yeah, yeah.
but most of what he did was just dialoguing with those kids in
Mhm.
a way that came across as argumentative sometimes, but so congenial, so good natured, and really compassionate, noticeably compassionate toward them. You could feel the compassion. And so I'm like, okay, maybe it wasn't the perfect method of communication, but what else would work in that context? What are we going to go in and hand out glow tracts, hand out vegetarian samples, and hope they come to it? You know, I mean,
Mercy.
sure, do that, but he was doing something profoundly effective and won people to
Mhm.
biblical thought. And the second criticism I heard was the person was uncomfortable with, because they had worked with college students, with him having these dialogues with kids that were vulnerable, they said, and then creating content out of it, and he felt that was exploitive. I didn't agree with that either. I feel like
Mhm.
they loved being on, having
Yeah.
shorts about that,
Yeah.
and and he was so kind in the way he interacted with people that I think they enjoyed it
I
for the
like the
most part.
point he made, and I saw it. Unfortunately, like I said, I wasn't a big consumer of his content, but I saw it afterwards, after his death. That a young lady said, "Why do you come here to dunk on college students?" And I loved his reply. He was like, "Are you old enough to vote?" Yes. All right, then you're shaping the country, and I'm here to, you know, get you to think in different ways. And it's true. If you're old enough to vote, then you should be old enough to have a tough conversation and a straightforward conversation. And if I'm trusting you with placing a vote to for the morals or the leadership of this country, then you better be able to defend what you believe in. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking to a 53-year-old, a 30-year-old, or 20-year-old, or 60-year-old. Once you're old enough to vote, your ideas have to hold water. And if they don't, then you have to rethink your vote.
So
One of the hardest things. Go ahead, Joey.
I was just going to ask. So one thing I was going to ask from your article. So I generally agreed pretty much with the whole thing. But when you said that Charlie, what would you? So when you said that Charlie Kirk was kind of steep, or he came from like the Christian nationalism world, right? That's
Yeah.
not really how I would have described Charlie. So I just kind of, I guess, how are we defining Christian nationalism there?
Didn't he admit to being a Christian nationalist, and didn't he openly advocate for blue laws? I understand that at the Wisdom Pearl conference, there was a like some kind of panel, and he started defending blue laws, and then he all of a sudden like looked around, and there were other Adventists on the panel, and he said, "You guys don't believe in blue laws, do you?" And they all said, "No." And he was like, "Oh, okay." But
Mhm.
he's in favor of things like that, and Adventists are very cautious about things like that
Yeah.
for obvious reasons. Yeah.
Yep. The only reason why I would still bring that up is I would say there. So okay, Christian nationalism is a term. Really, if you go back and look at its public like usage, it really doesn't go past like it goes. It's around 2021. January 6th is where it really like if you look at uses of the term, right? That's where it really comes in. And then I think the first like person to really like prominently call themselves it, well, at least in public life, was Marjorie Taylor Greene. And so the way I would look, and maybe this is just semantics and whatever, but I would kind of look as there's Christian nationalists, right? There's people like Stephen Wolfe, Joel Webben,
Hmm.
even Nick Fuentes, right? Like very much like hostile, like Christian nationalists, like they're rooted in that. And then there's conservatives, and then some of those conservatives have been influenced by some Christian nationalist ideas. And I would very much say Charlie's in that category
Yeah.
because the reason why, so yes, he did say things like, like he had some openness to blue laws, right? And then he would say some other things like that. But then and then on the flip side, right, a woman would come up to him and ask him, is your opposition to abortion rooted in the Bible and Christianity? You're trying to enforce that. And he said, no, it's rooted in reason, right? And we can explain it, right? I don't need, like, yes, as a Christian, I'm opposed to abortion, because I believe in the Bible and whatever, but for the law, I don't need it that way. There was somebody who came to one of his rallies and they were criticizing him because he's involved with Dave Rubin, who's a gay conservative. And he said, well, this is politics, not religion, right? Like we have separation of church and state, right? And he said that. And so I look at his blue law thing, and the reason why I think this distinction matters, right? So we had last year at camp meeting time, Gio and I had a conversation with Mark Tooley, who's the president of the Institute of Religion and Democracy, and he's very much an opponent of Christian nationalism. But we had found an article I think that he had written where he said something about in the article he was saying he didn't think blue laws were the most prudent thing right now, right? And he said the people advocating for him, it's like this is going to be hostile, whatever. Is like whatever. But he said in a culture where everyone, agreed, like at the time in the 18th century, maybe we could. So we brought up that article on the show, and then we explained the history of how, Adventists and Jehovah's Witness and other, not Jehovah's Witness, but like Seventh-day Baptists and others were persecuted or were arrested in various states and stuff. And then as we explained that history, Mark Tooley was like, "Oh, well, I don't want anything that's going to lead to that." Right? In other words, so I think there are some people who look at the history of blue laws and they just think, "Oh, like yeah, it would be nice to shut everything down." And so I think I don't know where Charlie felt. Like, would he want the persecutory ones? My guess is, for most of what I've seen of him, he wouldn't. And I think in many ways he was like a classical liberal, right? Like the kind of mainstream conservative with maybe some Christian nationalist influence. But I would distinguish that from, I guess, what I would say is like the hard Christian, like the people that I see as like the dangerous Christian nationalists. I don't know if
Revelation
any of that makes
13.
sense. Or...
Yeah, it was long winded, but it made sense.
Yeah. Yeah. He definitely was leaned more into, like, he didn't seem as firm on the separation between the first tablet of the Ten Commandments and the second as a guide for law. Um, and I don't think he was. I think he was fine. If you're in favor of blue laws, then you're fine with legislating the first table. So I think that that is a line that Adventists have held very faithfully, and I think
Mm.
it's an important line to hold. And I can see where, like I reason that second table issues can be legislated because they have to do with the flourishing of society. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, I think that you can very well, within second table boundaries, advocate against gay marriage because
Yes.
the nuclear family, man and woman with children, is the bomb. Like it has proven itself throughout history as being the building block of healthy, thriving civilizations. I think you can argue from history, psychology, and science that gay marriage is not good for the
Mm.
society. And so, for that reason, I think you can argue in the public sphere for those laws to be upheld. I don't think that's a compromise of separation of church and state. I can see how you could say, well, if we all had one day of worship and we just went to church on that day, it would be good for society. But to me, that would be crossing a line. It would be
Mhm.
crossing a line. And it would be that line between the first and second tablet.
Yeah, no, I mean, I obviously agree with you that it would be crossing the line. I guess the point I just wanted to make is I don't think, like I said, I don't think we were at the place, right? In other words, at the place in the public discourse where so in other words, I think as Adventists, right, we understand all these things, right? We understand, the theology of where all this stuff is leading, and we think that the people who are advocating, maybe like the state return, for blue laws or whatever, we think that they have all the understanding we have. Whereas, like, I don't think that from say Charlie's perspective, he would have seen it as like what we described as the National Sunday Law. And so that's why I think, what Wisdom Pro was trying to do and what I wish, Adventists would have been better at, rather than shunning him, like having more discourses, right? Whereas I think some of these differences maybe could have been sorted out. But, you know, that's all I'm saying. But I obviously agree with you that the things in the first tablet, the state Caesar has no jurisdiction over those.
Yeah, I think that comes down to if we're going to be combative or winsome in the
Mhm.
public sector. And there's a lot of sort of validation. There's a lot of people putting out these loyalty tests that if you don't take a stand that this person is a fascist and this
Mhm. Yeah.
particular political movement is complete, you have to say all these inflammatory things to be considered number one, smart, or not under the influence of the Kool-Aid, and number two, good. And I am so tired of those loyalty tests. I know people are wrong. Charlie Kirk was wrong. Donald Trump is wrong. Joe Biden was wrong. Kamala
Mhm.
Harris is wrong. But as a Christian, I feel that our calling is to show up in the public sector as winsome and in an evangelistic posture instead of a combative posture. And we must bear in mind that every inflammatory thing or incriminating thing we say about a public figure could and will be used against us and could close doors of influence that otherwise might have been opened or might bring our lives to an end before their time. So I just think we need to be wise. And, to me, the biblical foundation of that is everyone's wrong. Like, so of course I'm going to disagree. I mean, I was reading through, there were so many things I was like, nah, but I didn't read the book for everything to be right. I read the book, to know more about what he was saying, to get to know him as a person, after his,
Mhm.
post um, posthumously.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I read it for information. It was a really good study.
What would you say to somebody who comes to you, who's from the Sunday crowd, who reads the book, and now is beginning to want to know more? Where would you begin with them?
I'd invite them to church. Some of the
Mm.
great events. We have a fantastic potluck. People come from all around the Orlando area, and they don't bring anything. They know that they're going to get fed, and
Mhm.
we have a fantastic potluck and some great events. We have a small group at the church. I'd probably get them to come to the small group first because then they can get to know people and socially connect, which is a really important part of, you know, getting to know Adventism is socially connecting. So I'd probably do that and then just tell them, you should check it out. Let's do some Bible studies on the Sabbath. And I would probably at some point give them the proof text that show that, yes, it's
Mm,
still binding and
mhm,
it's part of the Ten Commandments. And the reason that Christendom doesn't regard the Sabbath is historic. There was a historic change, and it wasn't a biblical change. It was a
mhm,
political change on the part of church leaders, and it isn't in the Word of God. I would show them all the history, and I think
mhm.
there's a place for those
Yeah,
arguments and those precepts. And
I
the,
think.
and it's like what light goes on. I mean, people see that stuff. They've
Yeah.
never seen it before because to some degree, people believe evolution because they've been conditioned their entire life
Hmm.
that this is just settled science. Like this is just how it is. And then to consider creation almost seems like a bridge too far for a lot of people. And the same thing is true of the Sabbath. People have just been conditioned to think that the Sabbath is Sunday. And so it takes a bit of effort and it takes some hitting in between the eyes with the facts. And so I don't really have anything against like the
Yeah.
amazing facts approach. I think it
Hmm.
reaches people.
Yeah. I think too often, I think we sell people short too often and think that they're not open to it. You know, too often it's the opposite. People haven't been approached in a winsome manner,
Mhm.
and people have got to take responsibility, like Charlie was, in trying to understand the subject for himself. And
Mhm.
until we do that, we're going to be tossed to and fro, whether you're Adventist or non-Adventist, depending on the doctrine. We have to take a personal responsibility to enrich our relationship with Jesus Christ. What are your favorite aspects of the Sabbath? And then I'll ask Joey the same thing, right? Here we're talking about the day. What are your favorite aspects of honoring the seventh day Sabbath?
I think that the day I've begun to see it more and more as a day for relational depth
Mm-hmm.
versus just don'ts
Mm-hmm.
or even just church activities. I think
Mm-hmm.
it at its core is a day of relational depth. So I think it's a day to connect with God in a special and unique way, and with other human beings in a special and unique way, with animals, with
Mm-hmm.
nature, to
Mm-hmm.
reestablish those important connections. And like I'll give you an example, like just a couple Sabbaths ago, my husband and I went home, had lunch. We were going to have people over. It didn't work out. So we were just alone and we hadn't really had a lot of time together. And all of a sudden, this thing came up and we had the deepest conversation we've had probably in our whole marriage about
Wow.
him, about him spiritually, about me,
Mm-hmm.
about our relationship. I mean, it was so good. And it was just such a God appointment. It just happened.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
didn't try to make it happen. It just happened. So I think that what you do with the Sabbath is you shut down a bunch of things that would distract you, and then you let the Lord, you have certain things you do. You go to
Yeah.
church, all that, but I think you also leave some space so that God can have these spontaneous, schedule spontaneous things.
Joey?
Well, first of all, I would just second. I think relationship, obviously the vertical relationship, but then also with fellow Christians, right, with your community. I think that's important. For me, nature, right. So like a lot of times my nieces or something will come over, and we'll go on a horse ride or something. I think that's important. But like on the theological side, one of the things that I think is really important, right? So reminding people that the Sabbath, like in Exodus, right? In the Sabbath command in Exodus, the Sabbath is a reminder that God created you, that you're made in His image, that you're worth. It's something about your ontological worth. But then also in Deuteronomy,
Yep.
right, we see that the Sabbath is about freedom, right? Obviously, God, I am the Lord your God who delivered you from Egypt, but we obviously know, right? It's deeper than that. It's
Mm-hmm.
God delivers us from Egypt, from Babylon, but most importantly from sin, right? And so I think the Sabbath is a reminder that you are created in the image and likeness of God, and right, even though you're fallen and messed up and screwed up, right, you can have deliverance, right, and victory, right, in Christ, right? And so the Sabbath is a reminder of your worth, and well, your worth twice over, really. So I think
Yeah.
I would just I would add that to it.
And you stole my thunder because I love to say that, right? Sabbath is a reminder that I'm twice his by creation and by redemption. And I come at it from a different perspective because I am a minister, so I'm preaching, right? Technically I'm working on the Sabbath, right? Like the priests who were allowed to officiate, and yet they weren't committing sin. So it's a busy day for me. I'm preparing a message, I'm delivering a message, I'm ministering to people. But that's why I like leaning on the theological aspect of it, because it is a respite, right, from the administrative work that I do throughout the week. And it's a reminder that even though it's my busiest day per se, in one sense, it is also my most joyous day because now I'm doing that which I love, telling people about Jesus Christ, right? I don't have to worry about, are the PowerPoint done? Is the stewardship report, annual report done? All the answering emails throughout the week, all that is laid aside and I get to concentrate on my best friend, which is Jesus. And obviously, you know, uh, as a family, we get to spend together. My wife's not working. There's no school for the kids. Other people are in the same boat, and you do get the fellowship. We had uh, 3 families at my house this past Sabbath after, and you get to meet people and know more about them in ways that you can't at church, right? Because at church, everybody wants to talk to the pastor or has a need. But in my house, it's more laid back. You get to meet people. And ultimately, right, the rest we're looking for is to be in heaven one day. And it's all going to be about relationships. Think of all the relationships you're going to form throughout all eternity and learning their stories. So that Sabbath for me is that reminder. I belong to him 2 times, by creation and redemption.
It's a reset.
Mm-hmm.
Because look, day-to-day life is a meritocracy.
Mm-hmm.
You go to work and you get paid. Imagine if your boss came to you and said, look, I'm doing you a favor. I'm so gracious. Here's your paycheck, like as if you'd be insulted. Life is a meritocracy. You keep your yard clean and the neighbors admire you. You do abide by the law and the police leave you alone. Everything is you do, and then this happens in return.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're not careful, the meritocracy of everyday life will convince us that everything is a meritocracy.
Mm-hmm.
But there's one place where all meritocracy falls away, and that's the foot of the cross and the throne of God. There is no meritocracy in Christ. It's all his merits and none of ours, So we need that reset. And I think what you said about freedom was so powerful. I've really done a lot of work with clients in the counseling space on the effect of feeling like everything we do is something we have to do. That's really bad for people. When they lose creativity, when they stop doing anything spontaneous and everything about life is just a routine over and over and over, and they start feeling like they're like an animal under a yoke, they're going to be depressed. They're going to start having mental health issues. So sometimes what I do with them is I give them this worksheet. It's called a freedom finder exercise, and they are to do several things in a day that are completely off schedule, completely spontaneous. Like you're driving home and usually you take a left on Park and a right on 3rd Street, and then you go down the alley and you go. Instead, you're going to stop at the park and you're going to wade in the fountain or do something, anything that breaks your routine, because I want people to have that sense of volition and freedom of choice to be sort of reignited. And they need to be reminded of that, lest they fall into this like just futility, life just being kind of like grinding out an existence.
Yeah, like a perpetual rat race, and it's not. The Sabbath is a reminder that we owe it all to him. And sometimes I get annoyed when people think that we honor the Sabbath because we're either trying to earn our salvation or because uh, it gives us merit. And it's the opposite. It's a reminder that without him, I could do nothing.
You're breaking the momentum of
Mhm.
merit. And you're
Mhm.
also breaking the momentum of slavery. Like we're all, in a sense, in slavery to having to eke out this existence and
Mhm.
make life work. And Sabbath just sort of busts out of all of that
Yeah.
stuff. And we end up in heavenly places in Christ, in a totally different sphere. And the psychological benefit of that needs to be looked at more carefully
Mhm.
because it's profound. I mean, the ability to just take a break from all of those sort of ball and chains in our lives is huge. I mean, and think about, to just get a sense of it, think about if you never had that. If
Mhm.
every week was the same, every day was the same, and you never had a day where you were just like, I'm breaking these chains,
Mhm.
resetting.
That's why my dad, who self-avowed, he's since passed away, but self-avowed workaholic, he would tell me all the time if it wasn't for the Sabbath, he'd work 7 days a week. And he appreciated that it wasn't, somebody trying to make him lazy, because he realized it was God who was asking him to rest. And so he appreciated that, and it served him well. And I think it serves, well, obviously you've seen, or people have seen the videos, that Adventists live longer than the average person. And part of that is, we, like Charlie Kirk says as we begin to wrap up, stop in the name of God, right?
Beautiful.
Stop
Beautiful.
in his name, and know that we have victory in him, not in us. Joey, any last thoughts before we give Jennifer the last thought of the night?
Yeah, I would just say, so as we're talking about Charlie Kirk, we're talking about the Sabbath. I would just say to the Adventists out there, right? Like, don't be afraid to engage in the public square, right? I mean, obviously, there's the verse, I forget where it is, right? But it says, right, truth stumbles in the public square, right? And God, and this displeases God, right? Like, we should advocate in the public square, right? In other words, I believe that Charlie Kirk cared about college kids, right? And the reaction to his death, right? So even I was just at Michigan camp meeting, and I went to one of the classes by Pastor Jeff Ackenberger, who's the chaplain at Great Lakes Adventist Academy, and he was saying that even on our academy, right, Charlie Kirk's assassination hit these kids harder than anybody, right? It hit the kids in our Adventist schools. It hit kids, right? Across, like, my nephew is, he's 14, right? He was 13, when Charlie was killed, and he was like, this hit him hard, right? Because he had seen, he grew up watching Charlie Kirk clips, right? And so many of these people. And here's the thing: these people, these young people that were grieving Charlie Kirk, why? Because he was like one political figure who talked to them like they matter, like their opinions matter, like he cared about their future. And he talked about that all
Mm-hmm.
the time, and they believed that he cared, and I think he really did care. And so because of that, that's what catapulted him. That's why they grieved. That's why in the weeks after his death, right, we were talking about revival in this country, right? That's why that happened. Well, as Adventists, if we want to influence people that way, well, then we have to actually care, right? And so that's not just having another Revelation series where we're telling everybody to come to us. That's not just, us having another conference where it's just us telling everybody to come to us. That's going on the college campuses. That's actually talking about the issues that they're talking about and bringing the gospel, bringing the truth, right? People are open to it, but they want to believe that you care. And so I would just say he wasn't perfect, right? We went through some things, we have disagreements with him, but there are things about his ministry that we should emulate, I think, as Adventists.
Mm-hmm.
Amen. So much yes. Right after his death, I spoke in a church, and there was a kid there. He was about 20 years old, really young kid. And I believe the kid had gone to the Wisdom Pearl conference, just to
Mm.
give you an idea of like where the kid plotted. And sweet kid, and he was running the sound system. And I asked the congregation, it was a small group of people, and I said, what kind of week did you have on a scale of 1 to 10? And he said 1. And I went up to him afterward. I looked in his eyes and I said, was it Charlie Kirk? And he said, yeah. Devastated. And okay, so some of the things Kirk said were really off. And I get that they really hurt people and opened some old wounds. I get that. But you can't ignore the fact that he had an impact on young people that we don't have. And that those of us that thought he was a racist aren't really having necessarily in many respects. And so if you really object to who he was and the mistakes that he made, which were real, do better. But follow what is followable about him without the objectionable things.
Yep. Like the Bible says,
Yeah.
examine everything and keep that which is good. Dr. Jennifer, thank you once again for joining us. It had been a while, but once again, we enjoyed the article. And until next time on the Gio and Joey Show, be blessed.